January 12th, 1945, 0847 hours. Houffalize, Belgium. Through the Tiger's commander cupola, Hauptmann Klaus Weimer watched the distant tree line with the confidence of a predator that had never met its match. His Tiger I had survived 18 months of combat across 3 countries, accumulating 43 confirmed kills, without taking a single penetrating hit. The mathematics of survival were simple. Maintain range beyond 1,000 meters, use superior optics to acquire targets first, and let the 88mm KWK-36 gun do what German engineering had designed it to do. What Weimer couldn't know as he scanned for American armor was that 8,000 kilometers away, in a metallurgy laboratory at the Watertown Arsenal in Massachusetts, American engineers had solved a problem that would render his tactical calculations obsolete. They had created a projectile that would punch through his Tiger's frontal armor at ranges he considered absolutely safe. For 3 years, German heavy tank crews had operated, under assumptions that seemed mathematically unassailable. The Tiger I's frontal hull armor measured 100 millimeters thick, set at angles that increased effective thickness to approximately 120 millimeters. The turret face boasted 120 millimeters of flat armor. Allied intelligence had tested captured ammunition against captured German armor panels, establishing definitive penetration ranges for every Allied tank gun in service. The American 75mm M3 gun-firing standard M72 armor-piercing shot could penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor only at ranges under 100 meters, and only with perfect perpendicular impacts. The British 17-pounder, the most powerful Allied tank gun in widespread service, could manage frontal penetration at approximately 500 meters under ideal conditions. These weren't estimates or propaganda claims. They were verified through systematic ballistic testing that German intelligence had access to through various means. German tank crews built their entire tactical doctrine around these numbers. A. Tiger positioned at 1,200 meters could engage American Shermans with near impunity, destroying them one by one as they attempted to close range. The psychology this created was as powerful as the armor itself. Veterans of Schwerpanzerabteilung 503 described the feeling as hunting deer that couldn't shoot back. Oberscharführer Heinrich Bauer, a Tiger commander who survived the war, recalled in his memoir, "We knew the Americans were brave. We watched them charge across open fields, trying to close range where their guns might threaten us. But bravery cannot defeat mathematics. We could kill them at 2,000 meters. They needed to reach 100 meters to kill us. The equation was simple, and it was always in our favor." This tactical reality shaped every engagement. German commanders positioned Tigers on ridgelines and at crossroads, creating kill zones that American armor had to traverse to advance. A single Tiger could delay entire American columns for hours, sometimes days. The Battle of Elsdorf in December 1944 exemplified this dynamic perfectly. 2 Tigers from Schwerpanzerabteilung 506, positioned on hills overlooking the approaches to the town, destroyed 23 American tanks over 3 days, while receiving dozens of hits that merely scarred their armor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The psychological impact extended beyond the battlefield. American tank crews developed what combat psychiatrists termed Tiger fever, an almost phobic response to reports of German heavy tanks. Crews often reported seeing Tigers when facing lighter German armor or even destroyed vehicles. The mere rumor of a Tiger in a sector could paralyze American advances as commanders sought alternative routes or called for air support. German propaganda reinforced this psychological advantage relentlessly. Newsreels showed Tigers, shrugging off direct hits, their crews laughing as American shells bounced off their armor. Tank aces like Kurt Knispel and Otto Carius became household names in Germany, their kill counts reaching triple digits. The Tiger had transcended being merely a weapon. It had become a symbol of German technical superiority and invincibility. What made this confidence particularly deep-rooted was that it was based on genuine technical achievement, not mere propaganda. The Tiger's 88mm gun was derived from the legendary Flak 36 anti-aircraft gun, a weapon so effective that Allied pilots feared it more than enemy fighters. Adapted for tank use, it could fire a 22-pound armor-piercing round at 810 meters per second. The penetration statistics were devastating. At 1,000 meters, it could punch through 120 millimeters of armor. At 500 meters, it could penetrate 138 millimeters. No Allied tank in service had armor that could withstand it at normal combat ranges. The manufacturing process for Tiger armor represented the pinnacle of German metallurgical engineering. The face-hardened steel plates underwent complex heat treatment processes that created extremely hard surfaces while maintaining ductile cores to prevent shattering. Quality control was obsessive. Each armor plate was proof-fired before installation. The result was armor that didn't just stop projectiles, it deflected them, sending rounds ricocheting away in showers of sparks that German crews found both spectacular and reassuring. By early 1945, experienced German tank crews had developed an almost supernatural ability to judge engagement ranges and angles. They could estimate distances to within 50 meters by eye, calculate deflection angles instinctively, and position their tanks to maximize armor effectiveness. This expertise, combined with superior optics, German Zeiss rangefinders and gunners' sights, were acknowledged as the finest in the world, created a tactical edge that seemed insurmountable. The Tiger's gun stabilization was mechanical rather than powered, but German gunners trained extensively to compensate. The standard engagement procedure involved stopping the tank, acquiring the target through the Turmzielfernrohr 9B telescopic sight, making range and windage adjustments, and firing. A well-trained crew could execute this sequence in under 10 seconds, with first shot kill probability exceeding 80% at combat ranges. The Tiger rarely needed a second shot. Allied tankers who survived Tiger encounters consistently reported the same terrifying sequence: a distant crack, a flash on the horizon, and then the immediate impact of an 88mm round that could penetrate any Allied tank from any angle at ranges where Allied guns were ineffective. Survivors described watching their shells bounce off Tiger armor while German rounds punched through their tanks like a knife through butter. The material science behind this disparity was well understood by both sides. German armor used nickel-chromium molybdenum, steel alloys that provided excellent hardness and toughness. Allied intelligence had obtained samples and understood the metallurgy. What they couldn't match was the manufacturing capacity to produce it at scale while maintaining quality. The Germans accepted lower production numbers to maintain armor quality. Allied forces chose higher production of adequate armor over lower production of superior armor. This strategic choice created the tactical reality German crews exploited so effectively. An experienced Tiger crew facing Shermans knew that even if outnumbered 10-1, they held the tactical advantage as long as they maintained range discipline. The mathematics were brutal but clear. A Tiger could destroy 10 Shermans before any closed to threatening range, assuming the Tiger crew maintained composure and picked targets efficiently. The confidence this created was evident in German tactical manuals and training documents. Standard procedures assumed Tigers would engage multiple targets at extended range. Training emphasized target prioritization: destroy the lead tank to block the road, destroy the rear tank to trap the column, then systematically destroy vehicles between them. It was cold, methodical, and devastatingly effective when executed properly. Weather and terrain provided the only reliable counters to Tiger superiority. Fog, heavy rain, or darkness reduced the effective range advantage. Close terrain like bocage hedgerows or urban environments forced close-range engagements where numerical superiority mattered more than technical advantages. Allied commanders learned to avoid open-field engagements and to attack Tigers in conditions that negated their range advantage. But these were tactical workarounds, not solutions. They required Allied forces to accept limitations on when and where they could advance. The psychological burden of knowing that open terrain meant facing an enemy that could kill you long before you could threaten them wore on Allied tank crews constantly. Combat effectiveness studies showed that Sherman crews facing Tigers had significantly higher rates of combat fatigue and reduced combat effectiveness compared to crews facing lighter German armor. By January 1945, this tactical and psychological dynamic had persisted for over 2 years of continuous combat. German tank crews had internalized their technical superiority so completely that it shaped their entire worldview. They weren't just confident, they were certain. Certain that their armor was impenetrable at combat ranges. Certain that their guns could destroy any Allied tank at will. Certain that the only threats they faced were overwhelming numbers, air attack, or mechanical breakdown. What they didn't know, what German intelligence had completely failed to detect, was that American ammunition technology had taken a revolutionary leap forward. In arsenals across the United States, new ammunition was being produced that would shatter every assumption German tank crews held about safe engagement ranges and armor protection. The T-30E16 projectile, which American forces would designate as the high-velocity armor-piercing HVAP round, represented a fundamental redesign of anti-armor ammunition. But in January 1945, as Hauptmann Weimar watched the Belgian tree line from his Tiger's cupola, neither he nor any German tank crew in the European theatre had any knowledge that this ammunition existed. The complacency this ignorance created would prove fatal. German crews continued operating under tactical assumptions that were already obsolete. They positioned their tanks at ranges they considered safe. They engaged American armor with the same confidence they'd maintained for years, and they were about to discover that the rules of armored combat had fundamentally changed without anyone telling them. The myth of Tiger invulnerability was about to be shattered by a technology that German metallurgists and intelligence officers never saw coming. The psychological shock would prove as devastating as the physical penetration of supposedly impenetrable armor. The story of the HVAP round began not in military laboratories, but in the fundamental physics of armor penetration. Since the earliest days of armored warfare, engineers understood that penetrating armor required concentrating enormous kinetic energy on the smallest possible area. Standard armor-piercing ammunition achieved this through solid steel projectiles fired at high velocity, but by 1943, this approach had reached its practical limits against increasingly thick German armor. The breakthrough came from understanding a principle that seemed counterintuitive. A smaller, lighter projectile, traveling at higher velocity, could penetrate more armor than a larger and heavier projectile at lower velocity. The key was using materials with extreme hardness and density to concentrate impact force on a tiny penetrator core, while using a lightweight carrier to achieve unprecedented velocities. Tungsten carbide became the answer. With a density of 15.6 grams per cubic centimeter, nearly twice that of steel, and approaching the density of gold, tungsten carbide could concentrate immense kinetic energy in a small penetrator. Its extreme hardness, second only to diamond, meant it could maintain structural integrity during the violence of armor impact. The challenge was engineering a complete projectile system that could deliver this penetrator effectively. The solution was the composite rigid projectile design, which American engineers termed hypervelocity armor piercing. The projectile consisted of a dense tungsten carbide core surrounded by a lightweight aluminum or mild steel body that matched the gun barrel's caliber. Upon firing, the entire projectile accelerated together. Upon impact, the soft outer body shattered or stripped away, while the hard inner core continued through the armor. For the 76mm M1 gun that equipped later model, Shermans and the M18 tank destroyer, engineers designed the T4-shot, redesignated M93 HVAP. The projectile weighed just 9.4 pounds compared to 15 pounds for standard armor-piercing shot, but the tungsten core travelled at 1,150 meters per second, over 40% faster than conventional ammunition. The ballistic performance was revolutionary. Against the Tiger Eye's 100mm frontal hull armor, standard 76mm M79 armor-piercing shot could achieve penetration only at ranges under 300 meters under ideal conditions. The M93 HVAP round could penetrate that same armor at 1,000 meters. Against the Tiger's 120mm turret face, penetration range jumped from essentially 0 to over 600 meters. For the first time, American tank guns could threaten German heavy tanks at ranges the Germans considered absolutely safe. The 90mm gun that armed the M36 tank destroyer, and later the M26 Pershing, received even more impressive HVAP ammunition. The T-30E1 6-round, standardized as M304 HVAP, fired a tungsten penetrator at velocities approaching 1,200 meters per second. The penetration statistics were staggering. At 1,000 meters, it could punch through 221 millimeters of armor. This meant it could defeat the Tiger I frontally at any combat range and could threaten even the mighty King Tiger's 150 millimeters frontal armor at ranges exceeding 800 meters. Development occurred under extraordinary secrecy at the Watertown Arsenal in Massachusetts and the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Engineers worked in segregated facilities with armed guards and security clearances. Workers manufacturing components were told they were producing experimental armor-piercing shot for anti-aircraft use. The true purpose, creating ammunition that could defeat German heavy tank armor at previously impossible ranges, remained classified at the highest levels. The technical challenges were immense. Tungsten carbide is extremely brittle, prone to shattering if subjected to the wrong stresses. Engineers had to design the core to withstand the sensor. Violent acceleration of firing forces, exceeding 15,000 times gravity without fracturing. The solution involved careful control of tungsten carbide grain structure and the addition of cobalt binders that provided just enough ductility to prevent catastrophic shattering while maintaining hardness. The lightweight carrier body created its own problems. It had to fit precisely in the gun barrel, providing a perfect seal for the propellant gases while placing minimal stress on the tungsten core. It had to separate cleanly upon impact without disrupting the penetrator's trajectory, and it had to maintain the projectile's ballistic shape during flight to ensure accuracy at extended ranges. Ballistic testing revealed capabilities that seemed almost impossible. At Aberdeen Proving Ground, engineers fired HVAP rounds at captured German armor plates positioned at combat ranges. The results were documented in classified reports that remained secret until decades after the war. The T-30E16 round fired from a 90mm gun at 1,000 meters created a hole through 200mm armor plate that was nearly perfectly circular, approximately 30mm in diameter. The tungsten penetrator continued completely through the plate, with sufficient energy remaining to penetrate another 50mm plate positioned behind it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. High-speed photography captured the impact sequence in extraordinary detail. The soft carrier body struck first, fragmenting and stripping away in less than a millisecond. The tungsten core, travelling just behind it, struck the now cleared impact point and began forcing its way through the armour. The extreme hardness and density concentrated all the projectile's kinetic energy on a tiny area. The armour, unable to distribute the stress, failed catastrophically. The tungsten core created a narrow channel through the plate through a combination of extreme pressure and localized heating that briefly raised temperatures to over 1,000 degrees Celsius at the impact point. The physics of the penetration process differed fundamentally from standard armor-piercing shot. Conventional solid steel projectiles relied on their mass and hardness to force their way through armor, essentially pushing the steel aside. HVAP rounds worked more like industrial drills. The extreme hardness of tungsten carbide combined with tremendous velocity, creating a cutting action that carved through armor rather than forcing through it. Production began at several facilities in late 1944, but output remained limited by tungsten availability. Tungsten was a strategic material needed for machine tools, armor-piercing bullets for small arms, and various industrial applications. The War Production Board allocated limited quantities for HVAP production, creating an ammunition scarcity that would persist throughout the war. By January 1945, American forces in Europe had received their first shipments of HVAP ammunition, but in quantities far too limited for general issue. Standard allocation called for 5 HVAP rounds per tank, with strict orders to use them only against heavy German armor. Tank commanders were instructed to engage with standard ammunition first and resort to HVAP only when facing Tigers or Panthers that couldn't be destroyed with conventional rounds. The psychological impact of this scarcity on American tank crews was complex. On one hand, they finally had ammunition that could defeat German heavy armor frontally at reasonable ranges. On the other, they had so little of it that every shot had to count. Gunners described the pressure of knowing they might get only 1 or 2 shots with HVAP before having to revert to standard ammunition that was far less effective. Training on HVAP ammunition was minimal due to scarcity. Few American tank crews ever fired the new ammunition in training. They learned about it through technical bulletins that provided basic characteristics, higher velocity, flatter trajectory, better penetration, but offered little practical guidance on employment. The standard instruction was simple: aim center mass on the target. HVAP will penetrate. What training materials didn't convey was how dramatically HVAP changed the tactical calculus of engaging German heavy tanks. For 3 years, American tank crews had been taught to avoid frontal engagements with Tigers and Panthers, to use maneuver and numerical superiority to attack from flanks and rear, where German armor was vulnerable. HVAP eliminated that necessity. For the first time, American tanks could engage German heavy armor frontally at combat ranges with reasonable probability of penetration. The ballistic characteristics of HVAP required slight adjustments to standard gunnery procedures. The higher velocity meant flatter trajectory at combat ranges, requiring less elevation adjustment. The lighter projectile, more affected by crosswinds, requiring more windage correction in windy conditions. But these were minor adjustments that experienced gunners could compensate for instinctively. What gunners found most remarkable was the visual evidence of HVAP's effectiveness. Standard armor-piercing rounds that struck German heavy tank armor at range often produced spectacular but ultimately ineffective results. Showers of sparks, scorch marks, but no penetration. HVAP impacts looked different. The tungsten penetrator created a clean hole with minimal external distortion. There were no dramatic sparks or ricochets. The round simply punched through, often with so little external evidence that German crews initially assumed they'd been hit by a different type of weapon. By February 1945, HVAP ammunition was reaching frontline units in larger quantities, though still far from adequate for unrestricted use. Tank platoon leaders received 5 to 10 rounds per tank. Tank destroyer battalions equipped with 76mm or 90mm guns received slightly higher allocations. But the scarcity meant that HVAP remained essentially a special-purpose round to be conserved for critical situations. German intelligence completely failed to detect the introduction of HVAP ammunition. Captured American tanks yielded no HVAP rounds. Crews used them first in combat, conserving standard ammunition. Interrogations of captured American tank crews produced no information because most crews hadn't fired HVAP, and those who had were under strict orders not to discuss specialized ammunition. Examination of destroyed German tanks showed penetrations inconsistent with known American gun capabilities, but German technical intelligence attributed these to lucky hits at perpendicular angles rather than new ammunition types. This intelligence failure was compounded by German assumptions about American technological capabilities. German intelligence knew Americans had developed tungsten-cored anti-tank rifle ammunition and had experimented with tungsten penetrators for larger weapons. But they assumed correctly for most of the war that tungsten scarcity limited production of such ammunition to trivial quantities. They couldn't conceive that American industry had allocated sufficient tungsten for meaningful HVAP production while maintaining other tungsten-dependent programs. The result was that as HVAP ammunition began reaching American forces in meaningful quantities in early 1945, German tank crews had no knowledge that American guns had suddenly become far more dangerous. They continued operating under tactical assumptions that were increasingly obsolete. They maintained engagement ranges they considered safe, unaware that American tanks could now threaten them at those distances. The stage was set for a series of encounters that would shatter German confidence in their armor superiority. German tank crews operating Tigers and Panthers that had proven impervious to American tank fire for years were about to discover that the rules had changed. The supposedly safe engagement ranges they relied on were suddenly killing zones. The armor they had trusted absolutely was about to fail them. And because German intelligence had no warning, because no technical bulletins or tactical updates alerted German crews to the new threat, the discovery would come in the worst possible way in combat, when German tankers assumed they were safe and discovered too late that they were in mortal danger. February 27th, 1945, 1034 hours. Near Düren, Germany, Oberfeldwebel Martin Schreiber had positioned his Tiger Thirst exactly according to doctrine, hull down on a ridge 1,100 meters from the crossroads below, with clear fields of fire across open ground that any American advance would have to cross. He'd held this position for 6 hours, watching American infantry probe forward while their tanks remained concealed in the tree line beyond. The Americans were being cautious, which meant they knew German armor was present. Schreiber felt the familiar confidence that came from occupying the superior position. His Tiger had destroyed 11 American tanks since December without taking a penetrating hit. The armor was scarred with dozens of impact marks, badges of honor proving the impenetrability of German steel. At 1,100 meters, he knew, American tank guns were essentially useless against his frontal armor. He could wait for targets to expose themselves, take careful aim, and destroy them at leisure. What Schreiber didn't know was that in the tree line below, the commander of an M36 tank destroyer had just issued HVAP rounds to his gunner with orders to engage the Tiger that had been harassing their advance all morning. The gunner, a 2-year-old from Ohio who had never fired HVAP before, loaded the unfamiliar round and waited for the command to engage. At 1,041 hours, the M36 emerged from the tree line, stopped, and fired. The T-30E16 HVAP round crossed 1,100 meters in less than a second. Schreiber's gunner saw the muzzle flash and began shouting a warning, but the words died in his throat as the impact arrived. There was no shower of sparks, no harmless ricochet. The tungsten penetrator punched through the Tiger's 100 mm frontal hull armor as if it weren't there. The penetrator continued through the driver's compartment, killing the driver instantly, before striking the ammunition storage and detonating 3 88 mm rounds. The Tiger's turret lifted slightly from the hull ring as internal pressure from the ammunition explosion sought escape. Schreiber had exactly 2 seconds of confused comprehension, understanding that something impossible had just occurred before flame engulfed the crew compartment. The M36's crew, watching through their optics, saw the Tiger's hatches blow open and black smoke pour out. The commander, assuming the hit was lucky, ordered a second HVAP round loaded and acquired another target, a Panther that had been supporting the Tiger. The Panther's commander, seeing the Tiger burning, made the tactically sound decision to reverse down the slope to a safer position. The M36's gunner fired as the Panther moved, the HVAP round striking the turret at 1,050 meters and penetrating cleanly through the 110 mm mantlet. In less than 3 minutes, 2 German heavy tanks that should have been invulnerable at those ranges were burning wrecks. The M36 crew, having expended 2 of their 5 precious HVAP rounds, reported the engagement to battalion headquarters using standard tactical language that completely failed to convey the revolutionary nature of what had just occurred. The report read simply, "Destroyed 1 Tiger, one Panther at 1,000 plus meters, HVAP effective. But for German forces in the sector, the engagement was anything but routine. Survivors from Schreiber's Tiger, badly burned but alive, were evacuated to the rear where their testimony created immediate confusion. They insisted they'd been hit from over 1,000 meters, a range where American tank guns shouldn't be able to penetrate Tiger armor. Medical officers initially attributed their claims to combat shock and trauma. But when survivors from the Panther reported identical circumstances, commanders began taking the reports seriously. By late February 1945, similar reports were accumulating across the Western Front. German tank crews reported being penetrated frontally at ranges they considered absolutely safe. The pattern was consistent. American tanks or tank destroyers engaging from 800 to 1,200 meters, single shots penetrating frontal armor that should have been impervious, and the complete absence of the typical ricochets and sparks associated with ineffective hits. German technical intelligence officers examining knocked-out Tigers and Panthers found penetration characteristics unlike anything they'd seen from standard American ammunition. The holes were smaller, more cleanly punched through the armor with less deformation around. The entry point. The damage patterns inside the tanks suggested penetrators with far higher velocities than American guns were known to produce. On March 3rd, a breakthrough occurred when German forces recovered an intact HVAP round from an American M4A3E8 Sherman destroyed near Cologne. The tank had taken a direct hit from a Panzerfaust before the crew could fire their entire ammunition load. Among the unfired rounds, German ordnance specialists found 3 T4 HVAP rounds for the 76mm gun. The analysis that followed created shock waves through German technical intelligence. X-ray examination revealed the tungsten carbide core and lightweight aluminum body. Chemical analysis confirmed the extreme hardness of the penetrator. Ballistic calculations based on the projectile's weight and design suggested muzzle velocities far exceeding standard ammunition. Most alarmingly, the recovered round's design suggested it could defeat Tiger armor frontally at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Ordnance specialists immediately requested testing against actual armor plate, but this proved impossible. Germany no longer had facilities secure enough from Allied air attack to conduct systematic ballistic testing, and armor plate was too valuable to expend on tests. Instead, theoretical calculations based on the recovered round's characteristics produced estimates that were both precise and deeply disturbing. The analysis, distributed to Panzer commands on March 8 in a classified technical bulletin, concluded that American forces had deployed armor-piercing ammunition using tungsten penetrators that could defeat Tiger I frontal hull armor at ranges up to 1,200 meters and Tiger I turret armor at ranges exceeding 800 meters. Panther frontal armor was similarly vulnerable. Even King Tiger armor, previously considered impervious to frontal attack, might be vulnerable at closer ranges. The psychological impact of this bulletin on German tank crews cannot be overstated. For over 2 years, they had operated under the assumption that maintaining 1,000-plus meter engagement ranges provided virtual immunity from American tank fire. This assumption had shaped every tactical decision, every defensive position, every engagement sequence. Now, suddenly, that assumption was invalidated. Hauptmann Friedrich Körner, commanding a company of Panthers in 11th Panzer Division, later described receiving the technical bulletin as like being told the laws of physics had changed. His crews had perfected tactics based on engaging American armor at 1,500 meters, while remaining safe from return fire until Americans closed to 300 meters or less. Those tactics were now obsolete, but Körner had no idea what should replace them. The bulletin provided no tactical guidance because German commanders themselves had no idea how to adapt. Should tanks withdraw to longer ranges where HVAP might be less effective? But longer ranges reduced German accuracy, while American tanks might close under, covering fire. Should tanks move closer to engage quickly and withdraw? but closer ranges gave Americans better penetration chances. The tactical calculus that had favoured German armour for years suddenly offered no clear answers. More insidiously, German crews now faced uncertainty in every engagement. When facing American tanks at range, they could no longer know whether they were safe. Were those Shermans carrying HVAP? How many rounds? Standard doctrine had called for engaging the most dangerous targets first. But how could crews assess danger when they couldn't know which American tanks carried ammunition that could kill them at range? This uncertainty proved as damaging as the actual HVAP ammunition. German crews began reporting hesitation in engagements, taking longer to acquire and fire at targets while checking fields of fire and escape routes. Commanders noted declining aggressiveness in tank commanders who previously engaged targets confidently. Psychological evaluations, conducted informally by unit medical officers, identified symptoms consistent with the tiger fever that had previously afflicted American crews' anxiety about engaging enemy armour, hypervigilance for threats, and reduced combat effectiveness. The tactical impact became evident in engagement patterns. German armour that previously held positions and engaged American advances at maximum range now adopted more defensive postures. Tigers and Panthers increasingly fought from prepared positions with clear withdrawal routes, engaging briefly before repositioning. The steady, methodical destruction of American armour at range that had characterized German defensive tactics gave way to more tentative engagements. American commanders noticed the change without initially understanding the cause. After-action reports from March 1945 noted that German armour seemed less willing to press engagements and more likely to withdraw after initial contact. Tank destroyer battalions reported that German heavy tanks that previously stood their ground were now breaking contact after exchanging only a few shots. The change was particularly notable in Tiger units, the elite formations that had previously been the most aggressive in seeking engagement. Schwerpanzerabteilung 503, which had distinguished itself through aggressive tactics in multiple theatres, adopted increasingly cautious procedures in March 1945. Battalion records show a dramatic shift from seeking engagement with American armour to avoiding contact unless tactically essential. Individual German tankers experienced the change as a loss of confidence that went beyond tactics to something more fundamental. Unteroffizier Hans Becker, a Panther commander who survived the war, described the realization that American tanks could kill him at ranges he'd considered safe as like discovering your home wasn't safe anymore. The psychological security that had sustained German tank crews through terrible losses and continuous combat suddenly evaporated. The material impact of HVAP ammunition was actually quite limited due to scarcity. American forces never had enough HVAP to supply it freely. Most engagements still used standard ammunition. Statistical analysis of German tank losses shows that HVAP probably accounted for less than 5% of actual penetrating hits on German armour. But the psychological impact far exceeded the material impact because German crews couldn't know which engagements might involve HVAP. This psychological warfare effect, forcing the enemy to assume worst-case scenarios because they couldn't know which threats were real, proved devastatingly effective. Every engagement with American armour now carried the possibility of being killed at ranges previously considered safe. This possibility forced German crews to adopt more cautious tactics that reduced their overall effectiveness, even in engagements that never involved HVAP ammunition. By late March 1945, German tank crews were describing their situation using language that revealed psychological defeat. Captured crews told interrogators they couldn't trust the armour anymore and didn't know what range was safe. Tank commanders reported feeling hunted rather than being hunters, a complete reversal of the psychology that had sustained them through years of combat. The final irony was that American forces never fully exploited HVAP's psychological impact because they never had enough ammunition to use it freely. Had HVAP been available in unlimited quantities from early 1945, allowing American tanks to engage German armour confidently at extended ranges, the psychological collapse of German tank forces might have occurred even more rapidly. As it was, the limited use of HVAP created maximum psychological impact with minimum material expenditure, uncertainty being more damaging than certainty, even when the certainty involved real danger. The killing range that German tank crews had relied upon for their survival, that zone beyond 1,000 meters where they could destroy American tanks while remaining safe from return fire, had disappeared. In its place was uncertainty, vulnerability, and the terrible knowledge that the armor they had trusted absolutely might fail them at any moment. The psychological journey from hunters to hunted was complete, and with it went the confidence that had sustained German tank crews through years of combat.